Before you judge me, before you call what I did revenge, I want you to do something for me. I want you to picture the person you trust most in this world. Your child, your spouse, a sibling. Picture their face. Now imagine them looking you straight in the eye and telling you that your reality is a lie, that your own mind, the one thing you've lived inside for 68 years, is broken. Imagine they do it with a gentle, pitying smile. That's the smile that breaks you. Not the anger, not the cruelty, the pity. My name is Bryn, and this isn't a story about revenge. It was a story about survival. The revenge part, well, that was just a symptom of the cure. If you think you know what it's like to be old, to be a burden, to be invisible, stick around. I'm about to show you just how loud silence can be. And if you've ever felt like someone tried to erase you, believe me, you're going to want to see how this ends. It started with the toast, burnt. Not just brown, but a blackened, acrid square of what used to be bread. The smell of it was the first thing I noticed when the world decided to tilt sideways. One moment, I was standing in my kitchen, the same kitchen my husband David and I had remodeled 20 years ago, and the next, the floor felt like the deck of a ship in a storm. My hand, the one holding the butter knife, wouldn't obey. It was a strange, disconnected feeling, like watching a puppet and realizing you've dropped the strings. The knife clattered to the tile, and a fog rolled into the corner of my vision. A minor stroke, the doctors later called it, minor. It's funny what people consider minor when it isn't happening inside their own head. My son Matthew was there in a flash. He's a portfolio manager, always dressed in a suit that seems one size too tight, as if containing his ambition is a full-time job. He held my good hand in the hospital, his own soft and manicured, and his brow was furrowed with what I, in my post-stroke haze, mistook for profound concern. He said, "Mom, you scared us. We can't have this happen again. You can't be alone." The "we" was him and his wife, Cynthia, a woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes. I tried to argue. I said, "Matthew, it was minor." The doctor said with a little therapy, "I'll be fine." My words felt thick, clumsy in my mouth. I'm sure I sounded like a child. He just patted my hand. "I know, Mom, I know, but we've found a wonderful place, the best. It's called Oak Manor. It's more like a resort, really. They have gardens, activities, round-the-clock medical staff, just until you're back on your feet." The words nursing home were never spoken. They hung in the air, thick and sterile like the smell of the hospital room, but Matthew dressed them up in fancy clothes. He called it a residential rehabilitation facility. He talked about the chef-prepared meals and the beautiful grounds until it sounded like he was booking me a cruise, not signing me into a long-term care facility. And because I was tired, because my brain felt like a bruised piece of fruit, and because he was my son, my only child, I trusted him. That was my first mistake. It was the mistake that almost cost me everything. Oak Manor was prestigious, all right. The lobby looked like a five-star hotel, with a grand piano nobody played, and towering floral arrangements that were meticulously fake. A smiling woman named Brenda, the head nurse, greeted us. She had a cap of stiff, blonde hair, and a voice like honey laced with something sharp. She called me dearie, and squeezed my arm a little too tightly. She showed me to my room. It was small, painted a placid, soulless beige, with a window overlooking a perfectly manicured lawn where no one ever walked. It had a bed, a chair, and a small dresser. My life, neatly condensed into a box. The first few days were a blur of condescending smiles and medication schedules. They took away the pills my own doctor had prescribed and replaced them with their own, little paper cups full of chalky tablets. When I asked what they were for, a young aide with vacant eyes just said, "Doctor's orders, Bryn. It's to help you relax." The episodes of confusion started on day 3. I'd asked for a second blanket because the air conditioning was relentless. The night nurse, a heavy-set woman named Carol, looked at my chart. She said, "Bryn, you already asked for a blanket an hour ago. We gave you one." I looked at my bed. There was only one thin, starched blanket on it. I told her that. I said, "No, I'm afraid you're mistaken. There's only one." Carol didn't argue. She just gave me that smile, the same pitying one Matthew had perfected. "Of course, dear. Let me see what I can do." She came back empty-handed, and the next morning, I overheard Brenda talking at the nursing station. She was dictating a note. "Patient Bryn, 8:15 p.m., episode of confusion and short-term memory loss, agitated, requested a second blanket despite already having one." My blood ran cold. It was a lie. A simple, easily provable lie. Yet there it was, being entered into my permanent record. I tried to tell Brenda the next day. I said, "Nurse, there was a mistake in my chart. I never received that second blanket." She just touched my arm. "Bryn, it's very common to feel a little muddled after a stroke. Your brain is healing. Don't you worry about it. We're taking care of everything." They were taking care of twisting my reality, one tiny thread at a time. A few days later, my lunch tray arrived with green beans, which I'm allergic to. I've been allergic my whole life. I told the aide, "I'm sorry, I can't eat this. I'm allergic." He sighed, a put-upon sound, and went to get Brenda. She came in, chart in hand. "Bryn, your chart says no known allergies. We did a full intake with your son. You never mentioned it." I stared at her, my heart hammering against my ribs, but I did. I told Matthew. I've told him 1,000 times since he was a boy. He knows. He must have forgotten to tell you. Brenda's face softened into that mask of professional sympathy. "Or maybe, dear, in all the confusion of the move, you forgot that you never had that allergy at all. It happens." And in my file, another entry, patient exhibiting signs of delusional thinking, claiming a lifelong allergy not documented in her medical history. They were building a case. Every protest, every attempt to correct them, was just more evidence for their narrative. I was Bryn, the confused old woman. My own son had signed the paperwork, given them power of attorney over my medical decisions. He had handed them the keys to my mind, and they were systematically changing all the locks. The medication dosage was increased. The world grew foggier. The line between what was real and what they told me was real began to blur, and in the quiet terror of those beige nights, I realized this wasn't a resort, it was a prison. And my sentence was to be erased, one episode of confusions at a time. The weeks that followed were a descent into a quiet, beige-colored hell. The new medications they'd put me on weren't for my stroke recovery. They were designed to make me compliant, to sand down the sharp edges of my personality until I was as smooth and unremarkable as the river rocks in the lobby's decorative vases. My thoughts, which had once been sharp and clear, now felt like they were moving through water. I'd be in the middle of a memory, recalling the scent of David's Old Spice, or the way the afternoon sun slanted across our living room rug, and then, nothing. The thread would just snap, leaving me adrift in a hazy present. This, of course, was perfect for the staff. Any time I'd try to voice a concern, to point out a discrepancy, my fumbling for words was seen not as a side effect of their drugs, but as a symptom of my condition. My son Matthew would visit once a week, on Sundays, after his golf game. He'd sit in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, checking his phone every few minutes. He brought me magazines about finance and glossy brochures for tropical resorts he and Cynthia were considering. He never brought anything from my home. No pictures, no books, not even the worn Afghan from my favorite armchair. It was as if he was trying to scrub my past life away, to make me fit more neatly into this new, contained existence. I tried to tell him. In those first weeks, I really tried. "Matthew," I'd say, my voice slow and thick, "they're making mistakes. They're writing things down that aren't true." He would just sigh, a sound of infinite patience that was more insulting than any shout. "Mom," he'd say, "this is Nurse Brenda's specialty. She's one of the best geriatric nurses in the state. They know what they're doing. You just need to let them help you." I remember one Sunday particularly vividly. I hadn't seen another soul besides the staff for days. They'd told Matthew that visitors were making me agitated, and he'd agreed to limit them without ever asking me. I'd been saving up my clarity all morning, refusing to take the mid-morning pill by hiding it under my tongue until the aide left. When Matthew walked in, I grabbed his wrist, my grip surprisingly strong. "Matthew, listen to me, please. They said I threw my food tray yesterday. I didn't. Carol, the night nurse, she knocked it over by accident, and then she whispered to me that I shouldn't make a fuss. Then she wrote in the chart that I was having a violent outburst." Matthew gently pried my fingers from his arm. "Mom, let's not get worked up. Brenda told me you've been having some trouble with your temper. It's a common side effect of the stroke. The brain's emotional centers can be unpredictable." He said it like he was explaining a complex stock portfolio, all detached analysis and zero heart. He didn't look at me. He looked at a spot on the wall just over my head. He believed them. He believed the chart, the institution, the professional with the stiff blonde hair over his own mother. A part of me shattered then. It wasn't about the stroke, or my health. It was about convenience. I was an inconvenience. My cluttered house, my sudden medical needs, my very existence had become a messy problem in his otherwise pristine life, and Oak Manor was the elegant, expensive solution. My mind drifted back, a defense mechanism against the sterile present. I remembered Matthew as a boy. He was never cruel, just ambitious. Even at 10, he organized his baseball cards by their market value, not by the players he liked. When David, my husband, was sick, really sick at the end, Matthew was the one who handled the estate planners and the insurance companies with ruthless efficiency. I'd thought it was his way of coping, of taking control in a situation that had none. Now I saw it differently. He wasn't managing the chaos out of love. He was managing it because chaos was inefficient. And now I was the chaos. I thought of David. Oh, how I missed him. He would have seen through this in a second. He would have marched in here, his voice booming, and raised hell until they gave me back my own life. He never cared for prestige. He used to say, "Bryn, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig." Oak Manor was a very expensive pig with a whole lot of lipstick. David had been a carpenter. He built things. He could spot a weak joint or a rotten board from a mile away. He would have seen the rot in this place instantly. The memories of David were a lifeline, but they were also a torment. They reminded me of a time when I was seen, truly seen, when my thoughts mattered. I remembered an argument we'd had over what color to paint the dining room. I wanted a warm yellow, he wanted a calm blue. We bickered for a week, painting sample patches on the wall, until our dining room looked like a modernist quilt. Finally, one night, he came in with 2 cans of paint and a mischievous grin. He'd mixed them together. We painted our dining room a lovely, soft seafoam green that night, a color of compromise, a color that was uniquely ours. Here in Oak Manor, the walls were beige. There was no compromise. There was only compliance. My resolve began to form, not in a flash of anger, but in the slow, grinding misery of utter loneliness. The catalyst was a Tuesday. Tuesdays were my worst days because that was the day my only other regular visitor used to come. My grandson Leo, my Matthew's son. Leo was 19, a quiet, watchful boy who seemed to exist on a different plane from his parents. He was a computer science student at the city university, a prodigy, Matthew would say, with a kind of detached pride, as if Leo were one of his prize-winning stocks. But to me, Leo was just Leo. Since he was a little boy, we'd had a special bond. While Matthew was teaching him about futures and bonds, I was teaching him how to bake my grandmother's oatmeal cookies and how to identify constellations from the back porch. He didn't say much, but he saw everything. After my first 2 weeks at Oak Manor, they'd told Matthew that Leo's visits were disruptive. Brenda had explained, with her infuriatingly placid tone, that I would get weepy and confused after he left. It was a lie. I got weepy because his visit was the only real thing in my week, and its ending was a small death. But Matthew, ever trusting of the experts, agreed. Leo was told he could only visit every other week, and only for an hour. On this particular Tuesday, his scheduled day, he didn't show up. An hour passed, then 2. I asked the aide, a new girl with kind eyes, if anyone had called for me. She checked the front desk. No Bryn, no messages. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the medicinal fog. Had something happened to him? Was he sick? Was he hurt? I demanded to use the phone. The aide looked nervous. She went to get Brenda. The head nurse strode in, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking with authority. "Bryn, what's all this fuss? Your grandson isn't scheduled to visit today. His next visit is next week." She held up the visitor log as proof. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "That's not right. Today is the 16th. It's his day." Brenda gave a small theatrical sigh. "Dearie, today is the 15th. You've gotten your days mixed up again. It's all right. Why don't you let me get you your afternoon medication? It will help you settle down." I looked at the digital clock on the wall. It had a date function. My heart pounded as I focused on the small numbers. She was right. It was the 15th. My stomach lurched. Was she right? Had I really lost a whole day? Was my mind that far gone? I felt a wave of dizziness and nausea, the sheer terror of not being able to trust my own perception. I let her guide me back to the bed. I took the pills. I swallowed. But as the fog began to roll in, a tiny, sharp splinter of a thought pierced through. The new aide. The one with the kind eyes. When she'd come in that morning, she'd said, "Happy Tuesday, Bryn. Today was Tuesday." I knew it was. But how could Tuesday be the 15th if Leo's visit, always on a Tuesday, was scheduled for the 16th? My mind, sluggish and syrupy, worked at the puzzle, and then I remembered. Matthew had called last week. He'd said Leo had a big exam and needed to move his visit from this Tuesday to next Tuesday, the 23rd. The staff hadn't told me. They had let me sit there, waiting, knowing I was waiting, letting my anxiety build until I questioned my own sanity. They hadn't lied about the date. They had engineered a situation where the truth would make me feel crazy. That was the moment. That was the turning point. It wasn't a sudden rage. It was a horrifying, cold clarity that seeped into my bones. This wasn't just neglect. It wasn't just bad care. It was a deliberate, systematic campaign of psychological abuse. They weren't just trying to control me. They were trying to dismantle me, piece by piece, until nothing was left but a docile body in a bed. And in that moment, sitting on the edge of that squeaky mattress, I made a vow. They thought I was a confused old woman. They thought my mind was broken. Fine, I would let them think that. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about proof. I would not be erased. I would find a way to fight back, not with my voice, which they had stolen, but with a silence they would never see coming. The next time Leo was allowed to visit, I was ready. I'd spent the week playing the part they'd written for me. I was quiet, placid, a little confused. I smiled vaguely. I took my medication without protest. I didn't question the chart. I made myself as small and unthreatening as possible. I was Bryn, the model patient. Inside, a cold fire was burning. I was hoarding my moments of clarity like a squirrel hoarding nuts for winter. Leo came in, looking worried. His dark hair was uncombed, and he had shadows under his eyes. He hugged me, and for a moment, I almost broke. I almost clung to him and sobbed out the whole nightmare. But I couldn't. Not here. The walls had ears, and the ears all belonged to Nurse Brenda. He sat down and I saw his eyes darting around the room, taking in the sterile beige walls, the clinical smell, the lack of any personal touches. He asked, "Grandma, how are you, really?" I just smiled my new vague smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart, a little tired today." I patted his hand, and under the guise of an affectionate gesture, I slipped a tiny folded piece of paper into his palm. It was a note I'd spent 3 days composing, writing it in tiny letters on the back of a napkin with a golf pencil I'd stolen from Matthew's last visit. Leo's fingers closed around it instantly. He didn't look down. He didn't react at all. He just kept talking about his classes, about a new programming language he was learning, his eyes never leaving mine. He was a natural at this. His quiet nature, which his father always saw as a social failing, was a superpower here. He understood the art of not being noticed. The note was simple. "They are lying, drugging me, recording false info. Don't talk, don't react. I need help. I am not crazy." He stayed for his allotted hour. We talked about nothing, the weather, his dorm food. When he got up to leave, he hugged me again, his arms tight around me. He whispered so softly it was just a breath against my ear, "I believe you, Grandma. I'll fix this." The relief that washed over me was so immense, I thought I might faint. "I believe you." 4 simple words. It was the first time in over a month that someone had validated my reality. It was the anchor I needed in a sea of manufactured confusion. 2 weeks passed, 2 agonizingly long weeks where I had to continue the charade. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I had to let them patronize me, lie to me, drug me into a stupor, all while smiling my vacant smile. I focused on the details. I memorized names: Brenda, the queen bee; Carol, the cruel night nurse; a smug orderly named Rick, who seemed to enjoy withholding small comforts like an extra pillow. I started to notice things, like how they would always document their lies at the end of their shift, clustering together at the nurse's station, their voices low and conspiratorial. During this time, I also started paying more attention to Agnes. Agnes was in the room across the hall. She was tiny and bird-like, with wide, frightened eyes. She'd had a severe stroke that had left her mostly nonverbal. Her family visited, but they were like Matthew. They spoke to the nurses, not to Agnes. They'd pat her head, tell her she was in the best hands, and leave. I saw the way the staff treated her when her family was gone. They'd leave her food tray just out of reach. They'd take forever to answer her call button, and when they did, they'd sigh and mutter about how demanding she was. One afternoon, I saw Rick, the orderly, changing her television channel from the classical music station she clearly enjoyed to a blaring, violent action movie. When she made a small sound of protest, a little whimper, he just laughed. He said, "Lighten up, Agnes, live a little." Watching her, so helpless, and so utterly at their mercy, solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was for Agnes. It was for every person who had ever been dismissed, ignored, and abused behind the closed doors of a place that was supposed to be a sanctuary. It wasn't about revenge until it was. It became about a righteous, biblical-level accounting for what they were doing to the most vulnerable among us. Leo's next visit was the beginning of the revolution. He walked in carrying a large, gift-wrapped box. "Happy late birthday, Grandma," he said, loud enough for the aide down the hall to hear. His parents had insisted he get me something to brighten up the room. Inside the box was a digital photo frame. It was sleek and modern, with a black border. It looked like 1,000 other such frames. He plugged it in, and the screen lit up with a photo of him and me at the beach years ago, both of us laughing, covered in sand. Pictures started to cycle through David and me on our wedding day. Matthew as a gap-toothed little boy, me holding a newborn Leo, his tiny hand wrapped around my finger. It was a Trojan horse filled with my own life, smuggled into the heart of the enemy camp. Leo fussed with the settings, his back to the door. As he worked, he spoke in a low, even voice. "Grandma, this frame is connected to the internet. It has its own Wi-Fi hotspot, a private one that doesn't use the nursing home's network. I'll be the only one who can access it. Are you listening?" I nodded, my eyes fixed on a picture of my old rose garden. "Yes," I whispered. He continued, his fingers flying across the back of the device. "There's a camera. It's right here, in the top bezel. It looks like a light sensor. It can see the whole room. It records high-definition video and audio. It uploads everything in real time to a secure, encrypted server that I built. Everything it sees, I see. Everything it hears, I hear." My breath caught in my throat. "The photos," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "I can change them from my laptop. If you need to tell me something, look for a new photo of your cat, Patches. The background color of the photo will be a code. Blue means you're okay. Yellow means they're suspicious. Red means you're in immediate trouble. Just a new picture of Patches. No one else will notice, but I will." He straightened up as an aide walked by the open door. He said in a louder voice, "See, Grandma, all our best memories, right here where you can see them." He turned back to me, and his eyes were dark with an intensity that reminded me so much of his grandfather. "We're going to let them build their own gallows, Grandma. For 1 month, we document everything. Every lie, every missed medication, every moment of neglect, every cruel word. We don't just get you out of here. We burn this place to the ground." He left, and I was alone with my memories, both real and digital. I sat in my chair and watched the pictures cycle. David, Matthew, Leo, my life, and then a new picture appeared. It was Patches, my fluffy orange tabby, sleeping on a blue cushion. The background was a vibrant, impossible shade of blue. It was Leo, telling me the system was live. The silent takeover had begun. I looked at the tiny, invisible lens in the top of the frame. For the first time in a month, I smiled. A real smile. Let the games begin, I thought. The next month was a master class in deception, and I was the star pupil. My role was simple: to be Bryn, the fading matriarch. I became the part. I feigned confusion when it was expected. I allowed my hands to tremble slightly when a nurse was in the room. I spoke in that slow, halting way they drugged me into. Even on the days when the fog had lifted, I was a ghost in my own life, a quiet observer in a beige room, and it was the most powerful I had ever felt. They thought my age was my weakness, but it became my shield. No one suspects the frail old woman in the corner. No one notices she's counting their sins. The digital frame became my silent co-conspirator. It sat on my dresser, cycling through the smiling faces of my past, a monument to a life they were trying to erase. But its unblinking eye missed nothing. It saw Carol, the night nurse, mockingly imitate my slurred speech to another aide when she thought I was asleep. It recorded Rick, the orderly, forgetting to bring my water for hours on end. It captured, in crystal clear audio, Nurse Brenda telling Matthew over the phone that I was becoming dangerously paranoid and might need to be moved to the more secure wing. A wing I knew was for patients with severe dementia, a place people went in but never came out of, and it documented their treatment of Agnes. This was the hardest part. I had to watch them ignore her, belittle her, treat her like a piece of furniture, and I couldn't do a thing, not yet. Every time I saw Rick snatch the remote from her hand, or heard Carol speak to her in that saccharine, condescending tone, I would stare at the photo frame, my anger a cold, hard stone in my gut. I was collecting this evidence for me, but I was enduring it for her. Leo and I had our system. Every few days, a new picture of Patches the cat would appear. Usually, he was on his blue cushion. The day after Brenda's call with Matthew, Patches was on a bright yellow pillow. They're suspicious. That was the day Brenda and the home's administrator, a perpetually flustered man named Mr. Davies, did a surprise inspection of my room. They looked everywhere. They checked under the mattress. They went through my tiny closet. They were looking for a hidden phone, a recording device, anything. They glanced at the photo frame, saw a picture of a smiling David, and moved on. It was too domestic, too sentimental to be a threat. Their arrogance was our greatest asset. The evidence we were compiling was damning. Leo, my quiet, brilliant boy, was more than just a tech wizard. He was a meticulous archivist of their cruelty. He created time-stamped logs for every video file. He cross-referenced the video of them not giving me my real heart medication with the nurse's notes that claimed they had. He created a separate file just for Agnes, documenting every instance of neglect. He even, through some digital wizardry I will never understand, managed to pull the facility's financial records. It turned out Oak Manor was owned by a large private equity firm notorious for cost-cutting measures. They were understaffed by almost 30%, and Brenda received a significant bonus for keeping pharmaceutical costs down, which explained why they were swapping out expensive necessary medications for cheap, generic sedatives. It wasn't just malice, it was a business model. Our first move wasn't the grand explosion I had imagined, it was a surgical strike. Leo, using an anonymous email address and a proxy server that made it look like the message was coming from inside the building, sent a single email to Mr. Davies. The subject line was Incident in Room 2B, October 24, 9:32 p.m. The body of the email was just one sentence. Nurse Carol Hatcher told aide Jennifer Clark that Mrs. Bryn Wallace was dopier than a bag of hammers and that she could sleep through the apocalypse. A formal complaint will be filed if this behavior is not addressed. The effect was immediate and glorious. I was sitting in the common area pretending to watch a game show when I saw Mr. Davies hurry out of his office, his face pale. He pulled Brenda into the hallway, and though I couldn't hear their words, I could see the panic in their body language. Brenda's face, usually a mask of smug control, was tight with fury. For the next 2 days, the atmosphere was electric with paranoia. Staff members whispered in corners, eyeing each other with suspicion. They were hunting for a whistleblower. They suspected the new aide with the kind eyes, Jennifer. I saw Brenda take her into an office, and Jennifer came out 20 minutes later, crying. She was fired that afternoon. I felt a pang of guilt, but Leo had reassured me. He'd already found her online profile. He said, "Don't worry, Grandma. Jennifer Clark is going to be a star witness, and she's going to get a very nice settlement when this is all over." The firing of Jennifer was a mistake on their part. It showed their hand. They didn't try to fix the problem, they tried to silence the person they thought was the source. This confirmed for Leo that they had no intention of ever addressing the abuse. They were just going to plug the leak, but they were looking in the wrong place. The leak wasn't a person, it was a picture of my husband, smiling from the year 1978. Their panic led to their next error. They decided to crack down. New rules were implemented overnight. No personal cell phones for the aides on the floor. All visitor conversations were to be monitored for the patient's safety, and they called Matthew. That was the day the power began to shift in a way that truly terrified me. Matthew came for an unscheduled visit. He didn't bring magazines this time. He walked in, his face a grim mask, with Brenda at his side. He wouldn't look at me. He looked at Brenda as she spoke. "Matthew," she said, her voice dripping with fake sorrow, "I'm so sorry to have to tell you this, but your mother's condition has deteriorated. Her paranoia is getting worse. We had an incident with a staff member, and we believe your mother's accusations, her fantasies, were the cause. She's creating a toxic environment for the staff and other residents." Matthew finally turned to me. His eyes were cold. "Mom, what is this? What are you doing? They are trying to help you, and you're fighting them every step of the way." I looked at my son, the boy I had raised, the man he had become, and I felt a grief so profound it almost choked me. They had him, they had convinced him completely. I tried one last time. "Matthew, it's not true. This place, it's not what you think. Brenda is lying. Please just listen to me." He held up a hand. "Enough. I have your medical power of attorney. Mom, I make the decisions that are in your best interest, and Nurse Brenda and Mr. Davies believe it is in your best interest, and the best interest of the other residents, that we restrict your visitors for a while. It's too much stimulation. It's making you agitated." Brenda stood behind him, a smug, triumphant glint in her eyes. It was a checkmate. They were cutting me off from the outside world. They were severing my last link, my only potential lifeline, or so they thought. "No more visitors," Matthew repeated, his voice firm. "Not even Leo, especially not Leo. Brenda says he's the main trigger for your episodes." And just like that, he signed the paper she held out on a clipboard. He condemned me to total isolation based on the word of a woman he'd known for 6 weeks over the woman who had known him his entire life. He turned to leave, and I said his name, just once. "Matthew." He paused at the door but didn't turn around. "I'll be back when you're feeling more like yourself, Mom." He walked out, and Brenda gave me a small, victorious smile before closing the door, leaving me alone in the beige silence. I sat there for a long time, the silence pressing in on me. The grief I felt was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest. The betrayal was absolute. It wasn't just that he didn't believe me, it was that he didn't even want to. It was easier to believe the lie, to pay the bill and outsource my existence, than to deal with the messy, inconvenient truth. But then I looked at the photo frame, and a new picture had just appeared. It wasn't Patches, it was a photo of a wolf, its head tilted back, howling at the moon. It was a picture I didn't recognize, one that was not from my life. It was a new message from Leo, a message I understood instantly. The time for quiet observation was over. The time for hunting had begun. They had meant to isolate me, to cut me off, and leave me to rot. But all they had done was remove the last obstacle. All they had done was convince my grandson that there was no longer any reason to show them mercy. The day after Matthew's visit, the atmosphere at Oak Manor shifted from paranoid to oppressive. My door, which had previously been left ajar during the day, was now kept closed. The staff who entered my room did so with a new kind of detached efficiency. They were no longer trying to charm me or placate me. They had won. My son had sided with them. I was officially designated a problem to be managed, not a person to be cared for. They brought my meals, administered my incorrect medications, and left. The silence was profound. What they didn't know was that the silence was my ally. With no visitors, there was no one to interrupt the camera's view. With my door always closed, the audio it captured was pristine, free from the chatter of the hallway. They thought they were putting me in a cage, but they had inadvertently built us the perfect recording studio. I saw the new photo of Patches. He was on a crimson-red pillow. Trouble. It was Leo's signal that he was about to act. I didn't know what his plan was, not exactly. I just knew it was happening tonight. I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind of peace that comes when you've been in a storm for so long that the eye of the hurricane feels like a paradise. There was nothing more they could take from me. My freedom, my credibility, my own son, all gone. All I had left was the truth, and a grandson who was about to weaponize it. I ate my dinner in silence. It was some kind of bland, overcooked fish and mashed potatoes that had the consistency of glue. I ate every bite. I needed my strength. After the aide cleared my tray, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I refused the evening medication. When Carol, the night nurse, came in with the little paper cup, I just shook my head. No, thank you. Her eyes narrowed. Bryn, don't start this again. Doctor's orders. You need to take your medication. I looked her straight in the eye. My mind, for the first time in a day, was completely clear of their fog. I said, no, I don't think I do. She huffed, a sound of pure annoyance. Fine, have it your way. She made a great show of scribbling in my chart. Patient refused medication, non-compliant and combative. I'm sure that's what she wrote. It didn't matter anymore. Nothing she wrote in that chart would ever matter again. I sat in my chair, the one facing the door, and I watched the digital frame. It was cycling through my life, David and me, young and beaming. Matthew on his first bicycle. Leo as a toddler, chasing pigeons. It was a life full of love and light. A life worth fighting for. At exactly 8 p.m., the revolution began. It started not with a bang, but with a ping. The sound of the main phone at the nurse's station ringing. Then it rang again, and again. I could hear the aide on duty answer, her voice flustered. Oak Manor, how can I help you? Pause. No ma'am, I'm not authorized to comment on that. The phone was slammed down, only to ring again immediately. This went on for 10 minutes, a relentless cascading torrent of calls. Then through my closed door, I heard a new sound, a frantic set of footsteps. Mr. Davies. He was shouting something about a local news channel. Brenda appeared in my doorway, her face pale and blotchy. What did you do? She hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. I just looked at her. I didn't say a word. I gave her my best imitation of the vacant, confused smile she had taught me so well. She didn't have time to press me. Her own cell phone buzzed violently in her pocket. She snatched it out. Her eyes went wide. Oh my God, she whispered. Mr. Davies, get in here. It's everywhere. It's on the Channel 8 website. Mr. Davies stumbled into my room, his tie askew. He was holding his own tablet, his hand shaking. What is this? What is this video? Where did they get it? And that's when I finally spoke. My voice was quiet, but it cut through their panic like a surgeon's scalpel. I think, I said, you should probably watch it. Their heads snapped towards me. And then, their eyes followed my gaze to the digital photo frame on my dresser. The image on the screen had changed. It was no longer a picture from my past. It was a live feed. It was a screen split into 4 quadrants. In the top left, a video of Carol mocking my speech. In the top right, Rick snatching the remote from a whimpering Agnes. In the bottom left, Brenda on the phone with Matthew, her face a mask of concern, as she spun a web of lies about my paranoia. And in the bottom right, a close-up of a nurse's hand signing off on a medication chart, while the time-stamped video next to it showed her simply walking past my room without ever coming in. Beneath the 4 videos, a simple, elegant text scrolled across the screen, 1 month at Oak Manor. Unedited. Live streaming now to the State Department of Health, the Adult Protective Services Bureau, and every major news outlet in the state. Courtesy of a resident, the color drained from Brenda's face. She looked from the screen to me, her mind finally connecting the dots. The gift, the photos. The quiet old woman in the corner, her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The smugness, the cruelty, the absolute confidence, it all just melted away, leaving behind a pathetic, terrified woman. Mr. Davies just stared, mumbling, no, 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 no. The photo frame on my dresser then switched to a new image. It was a single high-definition still. A close-up of the tiny, nearly invisible camera lens hidden in its bezel. A final silent message from Leo. Checkmate. The sounds from outside the room were growing. I could hear shouting in the hallway. The frantic ringing of phones was now joined by the unmistakable sound of sirens, growing closer and closer. A news van, then another, pulled up to the pristine manicured entrance of Oak Manor, their headlights cutting through the darkness, illuminating the grand, fake floral arrangements in the lobby. Brenda finally found her voice. It was a choked, desperate squawk. Unplug it, she screamed at Mr. Davies. Unplug the damn thing. But it was too late. It had never been about the frame itself. The frame was just a window. The broadcast was coming from Leo's secure server, miles away. Unplugging it would do nothing. The truth was already out. It was on the news. It was in the hands of the authorities. It was everywhere. And it was irreversible. 2 police officers were the first ones through the door. They were followed by a stern-looking woman in a suit who introduced herself as being from the state health department. They took one look at the scene, me, calm in my chair, Brenda and Mr. Davies, frozen in horror, and the damning evidence still cycling on the screen, and they understood immediately. The woman from the health department walked over to me. She had kind, no-nonsense eyes. "Are you Bryn Wallace?" she asked gently. "Yes, I am," I said, my voice perfectly clear. She looked at the photo frame, then back at me. "It seems we have a lot to talk about." I allowed myself a small, genuine smile. "Yes," I said, "I believe we do." They led me out of that room. As I walked down the hallway, I saw the chaos Leo had unleashed. Staff members were huddled together, some crying, some shouting. Residents were peeking out of their rooms, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning hope. I saw Agnes in her doorway, and for the first time, her eyes weren't filled with fear. They were wide with wonder. I paused and squeezed her hand. "It's going to be okay now," I whispered. As they escorted me past the nurse's station, I saw Brenda being put in handcuffs. She looked at me, her face a mess of tears and disbelief. "You," she spat. "You did this." I just looked at her. "No," I said, my voice soft but carrying in the sudden quiet of the hallway. "You did. You and your charts, and your little white pills. I just kept the receipts." The fallout was swift and spectacular. Oak Manor was shut down by the end of the week, its license suspended indefinitely. The state launched a full-scale investigation, not just into that facility, but into its parent company, the private equity firm. It turned out our little live stream had opened a Pandora's box of systemic abuse and neglect across a dozen of their properties. Brenda, Carol, and Rick were arrested, and Mr. Davies faced charges of criminal negligence and fraud. The story was the lead on every local news channel for a week. They called it the Oak Manor tapes. Leo, my brilliant, quiet grandson, had been clever. He'd released the footage through a lawyer, ensuring it was all handled legally and that he remained an anonymous source, protecting both of us from any legal blowback. He'd also, and this was my favorite part, sent a special password-protected file directly to the IRS, detailing the financial fraud he'd uncovered. The private equity firm wasn't just cruel, they were crooks. And nothing brings down the powerful faster than the taxman. Agnes and the other residents were all moved to other facilities, their families now fully, horribly aware of what had been happening. Agnes's daughter sent me a letter, a long, tear-stained letter of apology and gratitude. She said they had set up a camera in her mother's new room, one that they monitored daily. They were listening now, and Matthew, my son, he tried to call, of course. He called a dozen times the night it all happened. I didn't answer. He showed up at the hotel the state had temporarily placed me in. I refused to see him. Finally, a week later, he found me. I was sitting on a park bench with Leo, enjoying the autumn sunshine on my face, a simple pleasure I had thought I might never feel again. He stood before us, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, his expensive suit looking rumpled and out of place. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "I saw the videos, all of them. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know." I looked up at him, at this man who was a stranger to me now. "It wasn't about what you knew, Matthew. It was about what you didn't want to know. It was easier for you to believe I was crazy than to believe your perfect, prestigious solution was a lie. It was less messy." "I'm sorry," he whispered. Tears were welling in his eyes. "I am so sorry. What can I do to fix this?" Leo, who had been silent beside me, finally spoke. His voice was quiet but held the weight of iron. "You can't," he said. "You don't get to fix this. You made your choice. You signed the papers. You chose them over her. This is the consequence." Matthew flinched as if he'd been struck. He looked at me, his face pleading. "Mom, and here it is, the moment that some of you might judge me for. I could have offered forgiveness. I could have spoken of healing and moving on. I could have been the bigger person. But I was tired of being the bigger person. Being the bigger person is what got me into Oak Manor in the first place. So I just looked at my son, the man who had willingly handed me over to my tormentors, and I said, 'The thing is, Matthew, I don't need you to fix it. Leo already did. You have a good life, go live it.'" I stood up, took Leo's arm, and we walked away, leaving him standing there on the path. I didn't look back. It wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about reclaiming my own story. They tried to write an ending for me, an ending where I faded away into a confused, medicated fog, but I got to write my own. And in my ending, the dragons were real, but so was the knight. He just happened to be a 19-year-old with a laptop. So here I am. I'm living in a small apartment now, just a few blocks from Leo's university. It's not grand, but it's mine. The walls are a lovely seafoam green. Agnes sends me postcards from her new home, where she's learning to paint with her left hand. The world is quiet, but it's a good quiet. It's the sound of peace. The reason I'm telling you all this is simple. Listen. Just listen. When someone you love, especially someone older, tells you something is wrong, listen to them. Don't listen to the doctors with the fancy titles or the administrators with the reassuring smiles first. Listen to the person. Your belief can be the one thing that stands between them and a beige room where their voice disappears. My story had a happy ending because of a brilliant kid who believed me. But for every one of me, there are 100 others who don't have a Leo, who are sitting in that silence, waiting for someone to just believe. Thank you for hearing my story. It means more than you know. If you've been through something similar, or if this story resonated with you, please share your own experiences in the comments below. Let's make sure these stories are heard, so no one has to fight these battles alone. And if you want to hear more stories about people who decided they weren't going to be silent anymore, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. You never know whose life you might change.